Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel and also Vlogmas Day 6. If you are new here, my name is Sheena and I'm a digital artist who has worked with companies like Always Brand, Fiverr, Cricut, Gucci, and I just wrapped up a middle grade cover for a book with Penguin Random House. So if you are interested in maybe targeting or finding your art style, you're going through the ebbs and flows and want to hear a bit more about that experience, this video is for you. Not to mention, I'll be sharing some takeaways of what I've been going through in discovering my own art style, and hopefully that is helpful. So without further ado, let's jump in. Now, as I chat with you all, I will have a time lapse going of one of my most recent pieces. So hopefully it kind of keeps the engagement and interest for you. And we're going to jump into the first topic, which is why it's important to find an art style of some sort. So the first reason is because you want to be distinguishable and easy to spot. If you have an art style that looks like several other people, it's going to be really hard for brands and art directors to track you down and spot you. And I think one thing that has been very helpful in my art career is that as I've developed my style, I try to stick to it as much as possible unless I decide to really make a hard pivot, because that way when an art director comes across my page, they see my style and they can remember who I am just in case a project comes up. And there are many ways to stick to an art style, from using the same color palette multiple times, or sticking to the same type of structure, or drawing the same types of things like character design, or drawing animals, or drawing landscapes. But it's really important to figure out what your constant is and sticking with that. Another reason why finding your art style is so important is because it makes your creative process foolproof. If you think about artists or sculptors, designers, textile makers, they all kind of have a tool set that they return to over and over again. And this is important because they don't run into what I call decision fatigue, where they're trying to find the right brush or trying to find the right type of clay, and it holds them up in their creative process. So once you have all of your tools lined up and you know exactly where to go to get a certain brush that will give you a certain effect, you can jump right into your work and don't spend a lot of preliminary time hunting down those tools. Now, I will say, as someone who loves to experiment with different brushes, especially in Procreate, that it is okay to experiment and go out and find something new. But you kind of want to have that primary tool set that you keep in place at all times. And this just gives you a go-to standard or framework for your creative process. You can spend more time creating and less time searching. And the final reason is that it gives you a cohesive portfolio. Now, I personally struggle with this because I find it very hard to niche. You can even probably see from my YouTube channel that I'm kind of in many different buckets. However, I follow a lot of art directors, and one of the same tips they give over and over again is that your portfolio has to be cohesive. Part of what art directors do is they will gather your pieces and they will pitch it to a client, like a publishing house or an editor for a magazine. And if your art style is not something they can pin down and distinguish, it can be hard to hire you for jobs because they don't really know what you're capable of or what your sweet spot is. So that is super important to keep that portfolio cohesive. Again, by using certain color palettes or structures, or choosing a type of theme like landscapes and continuing to draw that over and over again. Or maybe you're very much into vector art, so you stick with that type of creation and not hop all around. And I will say, if you're like me and you like to dabble into multiple different things, maybe find a way to create subsets of your portfolio to show people what you're capable of without muddying the cohesiveness of it. Now, the next topic, have I found my own personal art style? Some people would say yes, and I've been told this multiple times, but in my mind, I feel like I haven't. I feel like I'm still on the journey of figuring out what my personal art style is. And to be honest, I envy people that find an art style and they are able to stick to it. And you guys know who I'm talking about. You go to their portfolio, you go to their social media page, and it is so obvious that it is them. And one of the examples I love to use time and time again is Temmie Coker. We actually follow each other on Instagram. I'm surprised he even knows who I am. But Temmie's style is very distinguishable. If you see a Temmie Coker piece, you know where it came from. And if someone tried to replicate him, you still know that it came from Temmie. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And is he experimenting? Is he trying new things? Of course. But if you come across Temmie's pieces, you know that he is going to use some type of portrait photography that is usually in black and white, and then he is going to stack it with visual elements and graphics. And that is just his style. I literally love seeing people being able to pin down a style and create variations of it, but stick with it. It is truly a talent that I feel like I have not been able to really do just yet. And I also do want to add on that being able to do something like that comes with confidence. It comes with confidence of knowing your medium, knowing your style, and so you know where your core is, and then you branch off from that. And that can just take time. Now, my art style to me has changed multiple times over the years, and I've been okay with that because I know that I am ever evolving. As I find new pieces of inspiration and have different experiences, my style will continue to morph into something new. But I think it's still so important that as you continue to find your art style, that you don't stop creating. You don't want to see these abrupt stops in your creative process because it makes it very confusing for the viewer, for the audience, people who are looking to consume and engage with your artwork. And something else to consider that I personally struggled with is if you are making hard pivots in your art style, you have to be willing to completely detach from that old art style and remove it from your portfolio or social media pages. Because what will happen to you is you will have a potential client or art director scrolling through your work on Instagram or on Behance or on your personal website, and they'll come across an old piece and they will stick to that, and they will try to pitch you a project recreating that type of style. And if you don't like doing that style anymore and you feel like it no longer represents you, you're going to be stuck between a rock and a hard place and probably get passed up for a potential job. So if you are no longer doing a certain art style and you never see yourself going back to it, be sure to remove it. And an example that I love to use is when I was being pitched for the middle grade book Sparkle, and it was actually inspired by an image that I had in my portfolio on my website, which is of a young girl with rainbow colored natural hair and headphones on. And the author loved that piece so much that she showed it to the art director. And when they were looking for like a middle ground to help me figure out what style they wanted for the cover, they referenced that piece. So I think it's super important to know what's in your portfolio at all times, because you could be thinking a potential art director is looking at a newer piece that you've done, when in all reality, they're dipping back to a super old piece from 3 years ago. And you're like, I don't remember how to create that. So it's just something to think about. So the third section or topic is about finding your art style, doing the work. So we all know that as you develop your art style, you're gonna do this by finding inspiration. And inspiration is all around us. But a trap that we all fall into, including myself, is finding inspiration purely through other artists that you follow. And there are two problems that come with that. The first one is that you're gonna end up replicating or imitating that artist too much, which not only makes you like a weirdo because they're gonna see that you're copying them, it's gonna make them very uncomfortable, and you probably will not be able to build connections and network in the industry if you're seen as an imitator. And the second reason you don't wanna copy your favorite artist too much is because all you're going to do is redirect traffic back to their page. Like I mentioned with Temmie Coker, I know his style. So when I see someone trying to replicate Temmie's style and not really find something of their own, it just reminds me like, let me go see what Temmie has created recently. I'm not interested in going through the rest of their portfolio because I know where the original lives. So when it comes to finding inspiration, I think we all go down the Pinterest track and we all try to find inspiration there. But what happens is we get that sameness energy where you're seeing too many pieces being replicated on the same Pinterest images. So I recommend really branching out and checking out maybe different creators that you haven't thought of before outside of illustrators or outside of fine artists. So we're talking photographers, textile makers, interior designers, filmmakers, look at movies. I've even looked to fashion designers and animators for inspiration. So it is literally all around you. And I know you hear this all the time, but it really does hold true that sometimes it just means going outside with your sketchbook and just sitting down and observing the space around you to kind of shake things up. And sometimes when figuring out your style, it may require you to replicate someone's work. I've personally done it, but I urge you with everything in me to not post that person's work publicly if you have chosen to replicate it for practice. The best practice is to keep it private. And I think when you're first starting out and you're trying to create artwork and you're getting traction and you want to get more followers and engagement, there is a feeling that you have to post every single thing that you create. And I always say that my creative process is kind of like an iceberg. You guys are only seeing the tip of what I create, the very best of what I put out there. And everything else lives in the iPad, lives in the sketchbook, because it's me trying out new things. And as you're kind of exploring your creative process, you may be leaning towards one of your favorite artists, maybe a structure they follow or a color palette, and you don't want to post that and possibly ruffle feathers or make yourself once again just look like an imitator. So it's okay to copy and replicate to learn, but try to keep it to yourself. And this final point, the final section I want to touch on, which I kind of touched on at the beginning, is to remember that you are going to be hired for the type of projects that you put out there. So if you don't want to be hired for a certain type of project, you really have to fine tune your portfolio and your social media pages. And the example I like to use is that it is rare that you will see a fine artist being selected to illustrate a children's book or a character designer being chosen to have a gallery opening. They just don't line up in the industry. And as much as I would love to see a lot of these industries kind of overlap and merge in the future, we also have to live in reality. And sometimes you're going to see there is obviously a distinct line in between every industry, and you have to figure out where you fall. Now, if you're totally fine with being niche and creating one type of artwork or creation, you're going to be totally fine. This process is going to be super easy for you. But if you're like me and you kind of have this ADHD brain, you like to be all over the place, you're multifaceted, multidisciplinary, it's going to be kind of hard to do that. My recommendation for that is to still have that one strong portfolio, but to possibly create subsets of that portfolio. I've seen people who are into fine art, but are also amazing character designers and even animators, and that's totally fine, but you have to find a way to separate them. So it's totally okay to develop multiple styles for art directors and prospective clients to look at, but you have to find a way to divvy them up so that they can see it all in one place. So if you want all animation projects, you should have a web page on your site that is only for your animation projects. If you're an illustrator, but you also dabble in photography, find a way to separate them. And you know what? Maybe even take it a step further and meet them somewhere in the middle to show that you can overlap your two creative processes. But I feel like if it's muddied and it's all over the place and you have a full portfolio of pottery making, photography, character design, animation, it's just going to confuse everybody. Finally, I will leave you with a quick story time about how me not following some of these very steps put me in a weird place with a client way back in the day. So back when I used to take commissions, I would get most of my work from my social media pages, which we all know that Instagram kind of works like an online portfolio these days. So I had a client reach out. She wanted me to recreate an image of her and her partner, and I was excited. I was just being hired for my first handful of commission works, and you know, it was a paid job. I took it on and began working on the outline and like the silhouette of the piece, and I returned it to her. Please keep in mind that I'm replicating a photo she already has. So once I've gone through the whole outline process and kind of showed her what it was going to look like, she gave me the thumbs up. She was happy with it. So I started to illustrate it, you know, add my color, add my textures. And then around, I would say the 70% completion mark, I reached back out to show her my progress. And I got hit with something illustrators who take commissions never want to hear, which is I wasn't expecting it to look like that. And I was quite surprised because I thought that I was right on par with what she wanted. But the issue was I had a newer art style that I had been posting in for about maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And this client was looking back to a much older art style that I was doing, which if I had to describe it, I was doing like harsh outlines around my pieces, and they weren't as much like free flow the way they are now. And that was her issue. She was looking for that older art style. Didn't realize that the piece would be more realistic and less like anime cartoon. And unfortunately, I was like, again, 70 to 80% done with the piece. She decided to just go ahead and get the piece completed in the current style that I had it. But till this day, I always feel like I put a bad taste in that client's mouth simply because I put too many art styles out there and just didn't think that someone would dig so far back in my Instagram archives to find an art style and look for me to replicate that. It almost felt like impossible for me to create that art style because that was back when I was still like learning how to draw, and that wasn't my true style. So if you don't want to run into those issues like me, you want to have the more cohesive portfolio, you want your drawing process to just be easier overall, these are just some basic steps that I think could be helpful. Of course, if you have any of your own suggestions that you think would be helpful for the community, feel free to drop it below because, you know, we're all still learning, we're all still figuring it out. And who knows, the more you experiment, the more you try new things, you may find that one art style that just clicks one day and you look at it and you're like, yeah, this is me. And that's what I'm looking for in my own personal art journey. So I hope you all enjoyed seeing the time lapse, hearing a bit more about finding my art style and my creative process. And if you enjoy videos like this, be sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe. And I will see you all in the next one. Bye.